Hello and welcome. My name is Trent Malachik and I'm the Northwest Area Ag Econ Specialist for the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service. And today I'd like to welcome you to our video titled Commodity Marketing Strategies. Here I'm going to go into why I think producers should consider marketing and why it's important on their farms. And again, as I tend to do, I relate back to experiences I have working with producers in going through these types of decisions and looking at their marketing plans for their farms. So we're not going to get too complicated here. Hopefully this will be a good beginner's intro into this kind of decision process. So thank you for joining me, and we'll get right to it. So the first question I'll have to ask a producer is why market? Why are you interested in marketing, or why are you not interested in marketing is usually the way it goes. And that's a very complex question with a fairly blank slide there, because there's a lot of different reasons why people choose to market or don't want to market their farms for commodities. And I would argue that it's one of the most important things they can do, because with the options that we have available to us to market our grain, we can sell almost any crop at any time during the year. And there's always a decision to be made when it comes to marketing grain. We can, some farmers will argue that agriculture is one of the most difficult professions because you work for an entire year without knowing what you're going to get paid. And I would tend to argue against that point, because I believe that at any time during the year you do know what you could get paid. You do have an opportunity to price that grain. So there's always a decision to be made when it comes to marketing. So first off, I'll ask this question: what is a commodity? And as you think about that, I'll go through these other terms here. But how does a commodity affect marketing? And as you thought about that for just a little bit here, what is a commodity? It has to be something in bulk that is of a certain measure, of a certain quality. We all can grow wheat, but we all have to bring that wheat to a certain quality grade and a certain poundage to fill contracts. So commodities have to be relatively similar in the way they are produced and the end result. It can't be something that's highly processed, because as you get farther and farther away from just the grain part of that commodity, or just the livestock, when we talk about that part of marketing, we get more refined and the product changes. So we're just talking about the bare bones, whether it's just grain from wheat or corn grain or grain sorghum or soybeans in their raw physical form. That is what a commodity is. That is what we're talking about. And that affects marketing, because whenever we're dealing with something that has a measure of quality and a measure of size to be delivered at a certain time, we can start to price out into the future. We can start to determine what that set of commodity would be worth at any given time in the future or currently. So it's a really powerful tool to utilize, to know that we can market something we haven't even produced yet. We can market something that hasn't been planted yet, because we are agreeing to fill that commodity contract specification. So that leads us into the next question here: when should you consider marketing? And that's all the time. Every second of your waking hours, we need to be kind of have that in the back of our mind, that there is a decision to be made, and not making a decision is a decision. So just because we decide to ignore something doesn't mean it isn't occurring, and it is important for good managers to consider their marketing plan at all times of the year. So what is the purpose of marketing? Raise that bottom line, minimize downside risk, and try to get the most for our commodities would be what I would argue. That minimize risk is probably the most important thing. The higher leverage producers we have, or the ones that need to guarantee a certain level of income, are even more interested in marketing, because that's a way that they can know in the future how much they can afford to pay to produce a particular crop, or even to decide what crop they want to plant. And that's what's so useful about futures markets, is they give us an idea of what that commodity is worth in the future when we plan to produce it. So to work our way into marketing, we need to understand how markets move and what affects prices. So on this slide, I will talk some about market fundamentals and technical information. So market fundamentals relate to supply and demand. Everything you might hear in general conversations between farmers to what goes across the ticker on the news. You know, crops that are doing well in other countries, crops that are suffering from drought, all of those different pieces of information are called fundamental information, and it's very important in determining the underlying value of the market. It doesn't tend to influence volatility as much as it does just to set the average price level at which volatility affects prices and the way prices move around that midpoint. So again, different types of fundamental information in the news. Information coming out of certain countries may be responded to in a bigger way than information that comes from other sources. So having an idea of what fundamental information is, what it means, will be very important in your marketing decision. And then technical information, as I'll put it here as my definition, is the mystifying art of reading into price action and reaction. And usually all technical information is looking at what's happened in the past and trying to predict what's going to happen in the future based off of that previous price action. So whenever I help producers, I use both. I tend to use technical information to get my baseline and get an idea of where I think prices may go, and then I use fundamental information to really try to determine where the midpoint of our marketing channel will be in the future, and try to give producers an idea of what would be a win in terms of marketing if we can get above that average expected price, or times when we may want to wait on prices to improve or make other decisions to minimize risk. So why not just jump right into it? I have here corn prices, and I call this the big picture. So this is just a graph here from April 2014 to January of 2017. There's quite a bit going on in this little piece of information that I have on this slide. We have various prices shown here, and we have different bars going horizontally across the page. That can be technical analysis. I just have a couple of resistance lines there and a couple of support lines, and where you put those lines is highly dependent on your experience with marketing and where you think different resistance and support lines lie, trend lines, and various things like that. But when I look at big resistance lines, like this top line here at 440, I use the two tops in this market going back to July of 2015, and then looking here again about June of 2016 is seeing two big tops in the market, putting that in as a strong resistance line. We come down here to the 380 level in this example, and we have a little bit of weakness in prices after they hit that top near 380, so I'll put that in as another resistance line. This is exactly how simple it can be when doing technical analysis. This is the bare bones types of things that people will do when we look forward into the marketing year with a new crop and trying to determine what we would consider a good price. And then you also try to tie in fundamental information as to why these tops occurred or why these bottoms occurred, and putting in support lines is kind of just the opposite of putting in resistance here, where we have kind of recent downward trends and then bumps up, where we see maybe there's some support in this area and then really strong support down here at $3, where the market went down, touched $3 and moved up rather quickly. So it's not anything incredibly complicated here. We can get a lot more complicated if we want to, but I'm going to keep it rather simple for this slide. So again, this is just the bare bones look at technical analysis at the top here in this graph. We come down to the bottom, I have a few pieces of fundamental information in terms of U.S. corn production in billions of bushels. You can see where prices are in relation to these production numbers, and back here in these levels with 1.73, 1.72 billion bushels, we can see that prices traded right around this midpoint near $3.80, and as soon as we got a bigger crop here at 2.32, we saw prices fall. So again, these are ways you can use fundamental information to explain what your technical analysis has shown you, or the pieces of this graph that technical analysis has highlighted, can often be attributed to the fundamental information in the market that's driving those underlying prices and giving us an idea of where prices should occur. So that's looking at big picture stuff. You get down and narrow it down and get closer in on more near-term stuff, and you can see here again I have another resistance line. That previous graph was probably looking at long-term trends, long-term ideas, and here we'll look at new crop decisions to be made. And we have, in this example again, just a resistance line at 420 set by this top here, and this candlestick graph is kind of showing us the green bars are when prices went up and red is when prices went down. And actually, while I just had resistance and support lines on the previous graph, here when we zoom in a little bit closer to nearby price information, we'll see that there's a little bit of an uptrend in this market, and we draw this uptrend along some recent bottoms to try to determine where prices may go. And then we try to also think about this nearby price movement. What does that mean? Is that going to determine, since we broke through this uptrend line, are prices going to continue sideways or move down, or will they try to continue higher? So again, this is just to look at some real simple tools that we'll use in determining these types of decisions, or whenever you hear other market analysts talking about these things, this may be how that they're looking at the market. So again, just illustrative purposes here and on this graph. This is another look at a different commodity, be it soybeans here, and going back to 2013 up through 2017 in this example on this graph. And it doesn't really matter when you're watching this video or what prices are at. This is just for an example. If we look at this resistance line here set from a relatively big top in the market up near 1550, and we saw prices come down, and we think about how we're going to look at where prices will move. The very more recent resistance line here at $12 can be maybe a goal of a good price to look at into the future of something we would want to obtain, because we know the market had trouble moving through that previously, and use this uptrend to kind of tell us where we expect prices to move through. If we see weakness below $10 here, maybe that's something that we should consider weakness in the market, and probably will have a hard time moving through to $12. Or if we keep along this uptrend line and prices keep moving forward, we know to kind of maybe let our profits ride and wait this thing out to try to determine where prices are going to go. So here on the soybean slide, new crop, so same thing we did there with corn. We have a resistance line more near term here as we zoomed in near 1035, and we have an uptrend line going through some bottoms projecting maybe up to 1025, but we do have some weakness here in the market. So again, kind of the same thing we saw with corn, that it's getting to be a real critical moment for this price movement here in this particular graph that we have to make a decision. So again, not trying to really predict any prices here. This is just showing examples of what in any given time of year, when you look at these things, the types of actions and the tools you can use to try to determine where prices are going to go, and how to determine whether a market is either weak or strong, bullish or bearish, and move forward with your decisions. Alright, so this is going to give you a marketing background. Again, I have there prepare for repetition, because you can't drive these terms home quite enough. And as you're just learning some of the terminology and things, it helps to hear things over and over again. So we'll move into our slide titled Marketing Terminology. And I won't read through all of those, but we have things like cash and basis and cash contracts, things people are relatively familiar with. And we can go down into a little more complicated things like options and strike prices and trend lines and things like that are all terms that the market uses to try to tell people where prices are going, or ways they can market their grain. But if you're coming into this decision not understanding what these different types of things are, it could make it very difficult to understand what people are talking about. So again, our cash price there at the top, that's basically the price we receive at the elevator, and basis is the thing that adjusts the futures market to the cash price. So that's kind of basis accounts for a lot of different things, whether it's distance from a delivery location, overall quality of the grain in that area, or time. There's some time value involved with basis as well. It's just the market's way of adjusting the futures price to your local cash price. So again, understanding what goes into basis and understanding that the end user is usually what sets basis, not your local elevator, kind of helps producers understand where prices are coming from. Cash contracts are a very simple form of a marketing that allows a producer to guarantee that they will deliver a certain amount of bushels for a guaranteed price, and again, utilized by some producers more than other marketing options. But keep in mind that those cash contracts require that you deliver a certain amount of grain, whereas some of our other opportunities for marketing don't require delivery of grain. And then the basis contract is just locking in a particular basis price instead of a cash price. And there are various ways you would use that. All are going to be a little more in-depth than what this particular presentation anticipates to cover. So a cash contract, again, simple and effective. You know what price you are going to have at harvest because you lock in a basis with a cash contract. So again, if you write a cash contract that I'm going to deliver 5,000 bushels at $5, you have to deliver those 5,000 bushels. And if you can't deliver those 5,000 bushels, you have to buy them back at the market. And chances are, in certain situations, if you can't deliver those 5,000 bushels because of a crop failure or something like that, then prices may be higher than your contract paid you. So you may have to buy wheat at, say, $5.50 and only receive $5 for it on your contract. So again, it could get expensive. So we tend to be rather cautious in our cash contracts, and we only want to cash contract a small portion of our expected production instead of going for a home run and cash contracting our entire expected production. A futures hedge is a relatively simple marketing strategy, but it basically involves taking an offsetting position in the futures market. So if I'm growing wheat or if I'm growing corn, I am long the cash commodity. So I'm going to have possession of that grain, so I would want to sell in the futures market. So again, it's just that offsetting position there. So if I hold grain, I want to sell grain in the futures market, or vice versa. That's what the definition of a simple hedge. Futures price is set, but the basis can move in this example. So in the cash contract, the basis was fixed, but in a straight futures hedge, the basis can move, and it requires margin, which is the amount of money you place in an account with the clearinghouse that ensures that as markets are marked to market every single day, there's money available that if your position gains money, you will receive money from another person's margin account, and if your position loses money, money will be removed from your account and placed in that other person's account that made the money. So make sure that there's always a certain amount of money there to take or to mark those markets every day and to ensure that there's a flow of cash. Options are the right but not the obligation to enter into a futures contract. So options cannot exist without futures contracts. So again, it's that contract, the right but not the obligation to enter into the futures contract. Buying options requires no margin, but selling options does. So for producers who are looking for a marketing strategy that does not involve any margin and it does not require delivering grain, options contracts can be a good decision for them because they're allowed to guarantee a particular price on the futures market, but they don't have to be locked into that price. If you buy a put option at $5 and prices go up above $5, all you have to do is pay for the price of that option. You don't have to be locked into a price like you are with cash or futures hedges. So it leaves that opportunity for increased profits open, but it tends to be more expensive because of that. So something to keep in mind as well as we look at these different marketing strategies. And with that will be the end of this presentation. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about futures hedges and option strategies in the next couple of videos, so stay tuned. I'd like to thank you for joining me today. There's a link to more information at the eFarm Management website. And again, look forward to seeing you in those other videos.